Good morning. The hearing will come to order. I am pleased to convene the 114th Congress's first hearing of the Subcommittee on Surface Transportation and Merchant Marine Infrastructure, Safety and Security, which we have titled Improving the Performance of Our Transportation Networks, Stakeholder Perspectives. It is an honor to serve as chairman of this subcommittee, and I want to thank Chairman Thune and my colleagues for entrusting me with the responsibility to do so. Transportation safety and infrastructure development are issues that I care deeply about, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to further engage on these matters. I look forward to working with all members of this committee in the 114th Congress on issues that I see as bipartisan and core to the role of the federal government. I would also like to acknowledge the hard work and achievement of Senators Blumenthal and Blunt, who served as chair and ranking member of this subcommittee last Congress. They've laid a solid foundation and worked tirelessly together on this subcommittee with a degree of substance and attention to detail that is rarely seen. It's my hope to carry on the standard that these two senators have set, and I look forward to working with our new ranking member when that person is announced. Senator Blumenthal will be serving in that position today. The goal of today's hearing is to explore ways in which to expand and improve the nation's transportation networks. This subcommittee's broad jurisdiction stretches from transportation safety regulations to incentivizing and regulating infrastructure development. With such expansive authority comes great responsibility to govern appropriately. For too long, Washington-centric policies have impeded progress and frustrated citizens across this country. Repeatedly, I've heard from Americans who are dismayed by the federal government's tendency to tell communities, both large and small alike, what they will receive without ever asking what is needed. Nebraskans and all Americans deserve to have their voices heard when Congress considers how transportation policies will impact their states and their local communities. In the Nebraska unicameral, I served as chairman of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. My father also served as the director state engineer of the Nebraska Department of Roads. So transportation's in my blood, and I have seen how hard work, good policies, and a good attitude can lead to favorable results. Unfortunately, I've also witnessed the waste and harm that can result when proper oversight is not exercised. Congress should develop policies that address the unique challenges and the opportunities that have arisen across this nation. These goals cannot be satisfied by a one-size-fits-all approach. Rather, input and consultation from a variety of stakeholders will be required to develop dynamic strategies to respond to these diverse circumstances. To that end, it is important that we include stakeholders from across our country in our decision-making process. Their varied and extensive expertise will be invaluable to this subcommittee. The panel before us today represents just a few of the many stakeholders from private industries. What these individuals lack in shared backgrounds, they make up for in common interests, namely fostering sensible policies that ensure the highest safety standards while also promoting economic growth. We've asked our witnesses to share their high-level views on transportation. What's working, what's not working, how we can improve, and how we can better prioritize our resources. It is also a chance for members of this committee to raise the issues that they care about, and I hope they will continue to do so throughout this Congress. I'm optimistic that cooperation and consultation between the federal government and private enterprise will result in more effective and efficient policies. I would also now invite my colleague, Senator Blumenthal, to deliver some opening remarks.
Thank you very, very much, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for your interest and your passion on this subject, which I think is well warranted by the challenges that we face as a country. None of the challenges faced by our nation today are more important long-term than the need to rebuild our critical infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, airports, and of course, railroads. And we're fortunate to have with us this morning leaders in this industry, and one of our nation's very distinguished public servants, Governor Rendell, who knows better than anyone about the need to rebuild infrastructure. Literally just yesterday in Grand Central Station in New York, a train derailed. More than a minor inconvenience, this incident recalled the even more serious derailments that caused injuries and deaths over the past 2 years and reminded us that safety and reliability continues to be in question on our nation's railroads and in our infrastructure. We face enormous challenges as a country to maintain trust and confidence in our railroads and in our roads and bridges. And I am enormously excited to continue on this committee, even though I won't be its ranking member, because I think that it offers a forum and a means of creating even more momentum behind this cause. The fact of the matter is that passenger rail is a vital lifeline for this country, as is freight, in delivering people and goods and services. We've learned that the failure of a single bridge or the derailment of a single line can literally paralyze rail transportation up and down the East Coast. The outage of a single bridge in Norwalk, Connecticut, the Walk Bridge, can cripple passenger traffic as well as freight on the busiest railroad artery in the country. And that's why rebuilding those bridges and our roads and other critical infrastructure is absolutely critical. Resources will have to be devoted because that infrastructure is a critical prop for our entire economy. It is the foundation for the vital lifelines, economic lifelines, that are critical to our nation. And so I look forward to supporting investment, and it is investment, it's not spending. It really is investment that is vitally important to making sure that trust and confidence is restored and sustained. That is ultimately the lesson of a derailment like the one that occurred yesterday. It threatens not only the movement of people to their homes and businesses, it threatens trust and confidence in the ability of that kind of lifeline to function well. So I look forward to today's testimony and to the continuing oversight and scrutiny that this subcommittee will impose, because ultimately the task is not only one of private industry, it also is one of our government agencies, the Federal Railway Administration, the National Transportation Safety Board, and the failure of those agencies to properly oversee what's happening on the rails and roads is itself a jeopardy to safety and reliability. What we've seen is a failure to implement more than 100 critical recommendations from the NTSB on rail safety. And part of our task on this subcommittee will be to make sure that we oversee and scrutinize what those critical government agencies do to make sure that trust and confidence is sustained and enhanced. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I look forward to the testimony today.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. With that, I would like to introduce our witnesses today on the panel. Mr. James Mullen is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Werner Enterprises. Werner is a member company of the American Trucking Association and is among the 5 largest truckload carriers in the United States. Based in Omaha, Nebraska, Werner was founded in 1956. It is a prime transportation and logistics company with coverage throughout North America, Asia, Europe, South America, Africa, and Australia. Mr. Mullen joined Werner Enterprises in 2006, and he is ultimately responsible for the safety and risk departments within his company. Mr. Lance Fritz is the President and Chief Operating Officer at Union Pacific Railroad, which is a Class 1 freight railroad headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska. As many of you know, Union Pacific links 23 states in the western two-thirds of the United States, providing freight solutions and logistics expertise to the global supply chain. Mr. Fritz has been responsible for operations, marketing and sales, information technology, continuous improvement, supply, and labor relations at Union Pacific. As someone with such broad experience with the rail industry, Mr. Fritz is very familiar with the UP's capabilities, safety and capital programs, and network planning. Mr. Douglas Means has served as the as Executive Vice President and Chief Supply Chain Officer for Cabela's since April 2010. Cabela's is a Nebraska success story. It was founded around a kitchen table in 1961. Now headquartered in Sidney, Nebraska, Cabela's has become a global retailer of outdoor recreation merchandise, shipping its catalog to all 50 states and over 120 countries. Mr. Means joined Cabela's after an 18-year career with Jones Apparel Group, and he is now responsible for overseeing Cabela's global supply chain. We see a pattern here. But we are also very, very pleased to welcome the Honorable Ed Rendell. He is co-chair of Building America's Future Educational Fund, which is a bipartisan coalition working to enhance our nation's prosperity and quality of life through investment in infrastructure. As everyone here knows, Mr. Rendell served 2 terms as Pennsylvania's 45th governor from 2003 to 2011. Governor Rendell also served as the mayor of Philadelphia and as district attorney of the city. He is now lending his talent and energy to promoting federal infrastructure support to keep the United States competitive with our global partners. We are pleased to welcome all of you here. We look forward to your testimony. And Mr. Mullen, if you would begin, please.
Chairman Fisher, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the performance of our transportation networks and more specifically on ways to improve commercial motor vehicle safety. I'm Jim Mullen, Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Werner Enterprises, which is one of the 5 largest truckload carriers in the United States and headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska. The trucking industry is justifiably proud of its commitment to safety. Together, Werner and approximately 500,000 other carriers invest over an estimated $7 billion in safety annually. At Werner alone, we spend $40 million annually on safety, much of it on voluntary initiatives and crash prevention technology. As the industry continues to invest time and resources into safety, there has been a noted drop in the large truck fatality rate by 37% over the last decade. At Werner, preventable reportable crashes dropped 22% from 2007 to 2014. Contributing to this accomplishment are strategies that go beyond minimum regulatory requirements, including the use of driver training simulators and the adoption of onboard safety technologies. To continue this long-term trend requires a commitment on the part of the government and the industry to focus on the primary causes of crashes and effective countermeasures. The vast majority of crashes, close to 90%, are the result of driver error. It is quite logical, then, for FMCSA to focus on driver behavior and means to impact it. Now I'd like to discuss some of the current regulatory issues impacting Werner and the industry. Electronic logging devices. In 2012, Congress mandated that FMCSA require the use of electronic logging devices, ELDs, to monitor hours of service compliance. Werner is a strong advocate of this mandate and was an early pioneer of ELD use. In 1998, Werner became the first motor carrier in the country to implement electronic logs. Though FMCSA is making progress on this issue, congressional oversight is still needed to ensure a timely final rule that includes reasonable requirements. The hours of service and the restart rule. Last month, Congress temporarily suspended the restart restrictions pending additional FMCSA research. The GAO is also conducting a review of FMCSA's previous restart field study. Congress should provide close oversight of these studies and, if warranted, permanently vacate the restart restrictions. Entry-level driving training requirements. Requirements should be based on performance, not hours-based. No responsible trucking company has a place for drivers who have completed a minimum number of hours but have failed to master the necessary skills to safely operate a truck. Compliance, Safety, and Accountability, CSA. Werner supports the objectives of FMCSA's CSA program. However, we have serious concerns about CSA's ability to accurately identify the least safe motor carriers and the impact on safe motor carriers who are erroneously labeled otherwise. Issues with CSA that are of importance to Werner include the disparate enforcement amongst the states, the flaws in the mileage utilization factor, and flaws in the unsafe driving and the hazmat basics. All of these create an uneven playing field for certain motor carriers under CSA. Inaccurate scores can have serious implications. Werner is deeply bothered by FMCSA's use of crash data to measure fleet safety performance. Specifically, the CSA safety measurement system uses all crashes, including those that truck drivers neither caused nor could have prevented, to assess a carrier's performance. A truck driver who is the victim in a crash is scored the same as one who causes a crash. This is a significant point. At Werner, the most common DOT reportable crash involving a Werner truck is being struck from behind by another vehicle, yet that's scored the same as if we caused the accident. FMCSA has avoided correcting this issue for 5 years. Hence, Werner supports the industry's call and its legislative efforts to remove CSA scores from public view until necessary improvements are made. Lastly, I'd like to comment on the infrastructure investment. A commitment to infrastructure investment is needed to provide for the safe and efficient flow of commerce and the foundation for economic growth. Congestion on the interstate system alone cost the trucking industry $9.2 billion in 2013 and wasted more than 141 million hours. Further, congestion wastes fuel and increases the output of emissions. And lastly, but certainly not the least importance, sitting in traffic adds stress to drivers, which limits their compensation and leads to unsafe driving conditions. Werner Enterprises and the trucking industry have a strong commitment to safety and an impressive record to show for it. Continued improvement will require a focus on the primary causes of crashes, especially driver behavior, and incentives for the voluntary adoption of progressive safety programs. Werner looks forward to continue to work jointly with you, policymakers, FMCSA, and stakeholders to find innovative ways to fund and improve our transportation networks and commercial motor vehicle safety. Thank you again for the opportunity to share our industry's perspective this morning, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Mr. Fritz.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Fisher and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about how to improve the performance of the transportation network. My written testimony goes into much more detail, but in just a few words, the best way to improve performance in the rail industry is to ensure we have policies that support safety, service, and efficiency. These three things, safety, service, and efficiency, complement and are foundational to one another. Let me give you several examples of what I'm talking about. First and foremost, our industry must be able to earn sufficient revenues that allow us to invest in and grow our infrastructure. This is really the key to everything. Unlike other transportation modes, we must build and maintain our own networks. This takes huge amounts of capital, and more than any other industry as a percentage of revenue. At the same time, we are publicly traded companies that must provide a return to our shareholders that entices them to invest in our companies. The ability to make these investments allows us to improve safety, provide the service levels our customers demand, and create the efficiencies we need to ensure our economy is competitive on the world stage. Unfortunately, the Surface Transportation Board is considering proposals that would create a new economic regulatory scheme that would cap our rates and limit our revenues to some level set by regulation as part of a revenue adequacy proceeding. Those shippers who advocate this do so even though all the Class I railroads' average return on invested capital is below the average of companies in the S&P 500. Moreover, Union Pacific has allocated a larger portion of cash to capital expenditures than the average of companies in the S&P 500, and we lag these same companies in returning value to shareholders in the form of dividends and stock buybacks. Yet, we must compete with these same companies for investment dollars. Capping returns would be a terrible mistake, as it would prevent us from being able to grow our networks, as our investors would seek other, more favorable returns on their money. This would ultimately hurt all shippers and our country's economic vitality. Second, we must ensure we have fact-based safety regulation. Safety is of paramount importance to our industry and to Union Pacific. We are absolutely dedicated to safely serving our customers and communities. Our goal is that each and every one of our employees goes home safely and secure at the end of their shifts. An example of what I mean by fact-based safety regulation is proposals that require 2 people in the cab of a locomotive. There is no safety data to back this up. Commuter railroads and Amtrak only have 1 person in the cab. Now, Union Pacific is not attempting to go to 1 person in the cab, but someday technology may allow us to get to that. And we believe legislation or regulations that prevent us from using technology to become safer and more efficient would be a mistake. Another way to address safety in the rail industry is to get away from command and control type of regulation that's in place today and instead adopt a performance-based regulatory system. This would empower the FRA and the railroads to drive down accidents and improve safety using best practices rather than a cookie-cutter approach. In order to meet our customers' demands and changing markets, environmental streamlining or permitting reform is also important. The amount of time and energy it takes to get projects from the drawing board to construction and completion is growing longer every day. Congress should look at ways to make this process work more quickly, and I outlined some of those ideas in my written testimony. The last thought I want to leave you with is that we are a network. And because we're a network, actions in one place create ripples in another. We've seen this in the service issues our industry had experienced over the past year. Congestion or extreme weather in one place can cause impacts throughout the system. So when contemplating laws or regulations, policymakers shouldn't do things that balkanize the industry. That provides service requirements to one segment of customers that would happen if the STB implemented some form of forced access proposal, or have environmental or safety regulations in one area but not in another, as many states or localities would like you to do. That would be just a prescription for inefficiency and poor service. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fritz. Mr. Means.
Chairman Fisher and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. My testimony will specifically address some of the challenges Cabela's experiences today in today's supply chain and suggests some solutions to ensure that our nation's transportation system remains reliable and efficient for the movement of goods. Shippers are facing a unique set of challenges in today's climate. Managing inventory and operating a just-in-time network is essential to the health of any retailer and requires a predictable and efficient transportation network. When the efficient system fails to exist, significant costs are added to the supply chain. These actual costs also impact the selection of gateways to the U.S. and decisions on the locations of domestic distribution centers. As we make significant long-term investments in our own facilities, there must be an assumption that the transportation infrastructure will support those decisions far into the future. Presently, Cabela's and many of our suppliers are experiencing a number of inefficiencies as a result of the infrastructure not keeping pace with demand. We are all aware that the current congestion at the West Coast ports is causing significant negative impacts to our supply chain. Besides the increased costs being incurred, we have added anywhere between 5 and 15 days of lead time to our supply chain. An important factor to remember is that those additional days of lead time are unplanned time, which in today's just-in-time environment will likely result in lost sales, increased costs, and poor customer service. A cohesive national freight policy that concentrates on improving all services in a cooperative manner must be part of the next transportation authorization bill. The efficiency of our supply chain is compromised if any of those services are interrupted or become unpredictable. A strong and integrated transportation system is vital to our industry. We support surface transportation reauthorization legislation that focuses on improving the fluidity and flexibility of our nation's transportation system. Congestion leads to increased travel times, which increase costs and negates the efficiencies developed in a retailer's supply chains, including our sustainability initiatives. Along with volume, customer expectations of shorter delivery times, improved visibility to product, and more reliable service requires the transportation infrastructure to support these needs. Without a high level of confidence in the reliability of the network, we lose our ability to satisfy our customers. As the driver shortage issues continue to impact capacity, alternatives must continue to be assessed. First and foremost, a national intermodal structure is needed. We must have a national system that places priority on connectivity and accountability if we are to confront our transportation needs and wants, while keeping in mind that our choices affect this nation's economic growth. It is a vital necessity that Congress take into consideration the impact that last-mile connectors have on the viability of the supply chain. It is critical to have a smooth transition between the highway system, freight facilities, and our distribution centers. Any weak link in the supply chain negatively impacts the entire chain, raising costs and lowering productivity. A multimodal, efficient, predictable, and fluid transportation network is essential to the success of retailers. The long-term health of the entire network is critical to protecting our investments and to being competitive. With this kind of network in place, we can utilize all of its assets to support the specific needs of our customer and our many customers. Senators, thank you again for the opportunity to address the topic of a need for a comprehensive national transportation policy, and I would be pleased to respond to any additional questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Means. Governor Rendell.
Madam Chairman, thanks for the opportunity to testify. I'm here representing Building America's Future, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the proposition that we need to revitalize America's infrastructure before it's too late, and I'm here to report to you that it is almost too late. My co-chairs in this venture were Mayor Bloomberg of New York and Governor Schwarzenegger from California. Governor Schwarzenegger has withdrawn to go back to the movie industry, but he left us with the most endearing description and definition of infrastructure when asked by his 8-year-old son, "Daddy, what's infrastructure?" He said, "What Daddy used to blow up in the movies." He has been replaced by Ray LaHood, former Secretary of Transportation, as one of our co-chairs. Building America's Future wants to be clear about one thing. Our infrastructure is deteriorating. It's falling apart, and we are falling behind. Just 10 years ago, the World Economic Forum ranked our infrastructure best in the world. Last year, we were ranked 12th best in the world. We are falling behind. It is endangering public safety. It is ruining quality of life. And as these gentlemen have testified, it is hurting the American economy. One example, we have 12 major Atlantic coast ports. As the Panama Canal gets dredged deeper and deeper, these super tankers, they're called Panamax tankers, are coming to the East Coast. Only 2 of the 12 Atlantic ports are dredged sufficiently to receive them. So they're going to go to Canada to unload their cargo. And Canada is going to get the longshoreman jobs and the trucker jobs that pay $60,000, $70,000 a year. Congress talks about middle-class jobs. Those are middle-class jobs that pay a family-sustaining income, and because we don't have a sufficient infrastructure, because we've raided the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, something that WERDA finally corrected, we don't have the money to dredge sufficiently, and we're losing those jobs. Metallurgical coal is highly in demand in China. You find it in Australia and the U.S. Labor costs to mine it are about the same in both countries, but because it takes us, it's 4 times as expensive to get the metallurgical coal in the U.S. to the ports as it is in Australia. China buys from Australia first and only comes to us when the Australian coal mining can't meet the demand. We're losing dollars in every way we look. We're losing jobs everywhere we look. The answer, as Ranking Member Blumenthal said, is one single word, and you know that to be true, Madam Chairman. It's investment, because you invested in fixing the roads in Nebraska with LB 84, something that was highly praised and has spurred the Nebraska economy. We have to invest. There are 3 ways to invest: by bringing private capital to bear, by having the states invest, and having the federal government invest. I'm happy as a former governor to tell you that the states are doing their job. In 2014, red states and blue states alike raised their gas tax or increased their sales tax. Governor McConnell did it in Virginia. Governor Corbett, with a Republican legislature, did it in Pennsylvania. Wyoming, with an all-Republican cast of characters, raised their gas tax 10 cents. Pennsylvania actually raised it 28 cents over 5 years. Blue states did it. This year, South Carolina, South Dakota, Minnesota, Michigan, and Missouri are proposing significant increases in gas taxes. But they cannot do it alone. Give you one example. I-95, the nation's busiest highway, goes through Philadelphia for 18 miles. There are 26 bridges that support I-95 in Philadelphia. 19 of them are structurally deficient. To fix those bridges alone, to make them safe, and one of them almost buckled in 2008, to fix those bridges alone would cost $3.2 billion. The city and the state alone can no way, no how meet that demand. The American infrastructure is crumbling, and the time to do something about it is now. When Ronald Reagan raised the gas tax, and yes, for our Republican members, Ronald Reagan raised the gas tax. When he raised the gas tax, he said, why would we put off for 5 or 10 years doing something that we need to do today because it's going to be twice as expensive in 10 years? President Reagan was right. The time to act is now. On the private sector, BAF recommends that the Congress do a series of things. In MAP 21, you raised TIFIA from about the limit from 220 million to $1 billion. Still doesn't meet the demand for TIFIA. I would raise it, we propose to raise it to $2 billion. Lift the cap, the volume cap on private activity bonds. The qualified public infrastructure bonds that the President recommended in his State of the Union are also a very good step in the right direction because it shields the PABs from the AMT tax, which makes it a very good investment vehicle. Let's get the private sector involved. Create a federal infrastructure bank. Create a federal infrastructure bank funded with $5 billion. You will get it back. The European Infrastructure Bank makes money every year because they loan the money out and the money is returned with interest. They make money. That $5 million would not be spent. It would generate a lot of activity and you'd make the money back. Remove the federal ban on tolling interstates. That is one of the greatest disincentives. If we want the private sector to get involved, we have to give them a reasonable return on their investment. Tolling is one way for states to do that. We used to be able to toll freely. In, I think, the late 1990s, Congress put a bar on tolling federal interstates. It makes no rhyme or reason. People say, well, we don't want to pay for it twice. Well, when you buy a car, you pay for it once, and then you pay to maintain it. And we need to do the same thing. Lift the ban on tolling. Let this, if you're unwilling to do the job federally, give the states the power to do it. And tolling is an important vehicle to give a rate of return on private investment. So the states will do their part. You can do things to free up private capital. But in the end, it is inescapable that the federal government must invest more in our infrastructure. You knew that in Nebraska. Senator Klobuchar knows it in Minnesota. We all know that that's the only way to do it. It costs money to repair roads, to build new roads. It costs money to repair bridges. Federal government ought to invest money. The best vehicle for doing it for the time being is the Corker-Murphy bill. It raises the gas tax 10 cents and then adjusts it for inflation going forward. As you all know, the last time the federal government raised the gas tax was in 1994 when President Clinton was in office. The federal gas tax is now 18 cents, but if you adjust it for inflation, it is now worth 11 cents a gallon. 11 cents a gallon because it hasn't been raised in 20 years. We need to raise the gas tax. We need to adjust it for inflation on a yearly basis. It's absolutely the least you can do. That 10-cent increase for a driver who drives 12,000 miles a year, which is the average American driver, who has a vehicle that gets 24 miles a gallon, will cost less than $2 a week, less than $100. The Texas Transportation Institute did a study and found the cost of inaction. We always talk about how much it's going to cost if we act, but we never talk about how much it's costing when we don't act. The cost to inaction, and the gentleman from the trucking industry talked about repairs and accidents to the trucks that come from bad roads and inadequate bridges. The cost to idling in traffic because we have congested roads, the cost to damage to our vehicles averages $818 a year for every driver. Raising taxes, less than $100. Cost of inaction, $818. There is no way out. It is inescapable. Do your jobs. Raise the gas tax. The Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO, who probably couldn't agree that today is Thursday, they agree that we need to raise the gas tax. We will support you. The American people will grumble for a little bit, but after a while, they won't even have any idea that you raised the gas tax. I would like to ask your staff. That's only because,
Governor, you're saying it over and over again.
I would like to ask your staff a question. How many of you know what the federal gas tax is per gallon? Raise your hand if you know exactly what the federal gas tax is per gallon. Not the senators, the staff.
Oh.
I don't want to embarrass the senators. 2 out of 20 staff members.
No. Well, if you could wrap up, Governor, please.
I'm done. And we're done if we don't do something.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. We do have a vote. I believe it begins at 11, and so we will try to get through our questions here in a fairly expedient manner. I will begin, and then our ranking member will follow me with questions. We'll have a 5-minute round. Mr. Mullen, when you talk about Werner's commitment to safety, and you tell us the #1 thing that FMCSA could do to improve fact or data-driven safety regulations, what do you think that would be?
Well, on the commitment to safety, Chairman, there's 5 million plus drivers out there on the roads every day, and they take commitment to safety very, very seriously. It's their #1 priority. When I talk inside of Werner, we kind of put it in 3 different buckets. We talk about training, we talk about technology, and we talk about culture. So if you talk about training, just to kind of give you some idea of where we're spending dollars and resources now, is on simulation. So driver simulation is a big issue, and it's improving year over year. And so we have simulators. We work on new hires. We hire a lot of drivers that come in straight from CDL schools and just have their license. And so we train those folks with the simulators, and we've seen a very marked decrease in accident frequency from those that use the simulators. And technology, those onboard technology devices I talked about in my opening remarks, whether it's forward collision warning devices or lane departure devices. We've seen marked improvement in accident frequency as that as well. And that's a spend that's going to be about $6–7 million annually just on that technology alone. So we're very committed, and we're putting the dollars behind that commitment. And then most importantly, culture. The drivers need to know that safety is their top priority. And we talked about the electronic logging devices, and again, Werner started in the late 90s to make sure that we dispatched every load knowing that the driver could deliver that load legally and safely. And I think ELDs is where we ought to be going, is spending time on ELDs versus some of the peripheral issues that don't really attack the core. With regard to the FMCSA and data, I guess I'd have 2 things to say. Look at the data without any political lens. Let's focus on the core factors that cause crashes, speed, and those sorts of things, as opposed to things more on the periphery and might even get into labor issues. And so it's not so much the integrity of the data, it's just the manner in which we're looking at it and what data we're looking at to make sure we're providing the biggest bang for the buck on improving the highway safety.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Means, we've heard a lot over the past few months about congestion at our nation's ports. You alluded to that in your testimony on the effect that that's having on the supply chain. Can you tell us how acute this problem is for Cabela's?
Sure.
How do you manage that situation?
Sure. We've, we started to see the problem arise last summer, and as you know, just like most retailers, the fourth quarter is there's a substantial amount of volume for us that comes through as we prepare for a very busy shopping season. As I stated in my testimony, it's critical for us because we run as just in time as we possibly can, and we try to keep our investment in inventory to a minimum. So even a day or 2 of delay can create a big problem for us, especially in those busy times of the year. We literally took people out of role from their jobs at our corporate headquarters and moved them to Seattle, just simply to manage every single container that was coming out of that port. So we had 2 people there full-time for really the 6 weeks leading up to Christmas that simply their job was to manage the containers coming out of the port, manage equipment on our own, because we wanted to make sure that we could have equipment available when those containers came free. It was far beyond, I think, what anybody would expect just to get our goods, and an extremely inefficient process for us.
Thank you. Mr. Fritz, in my opening statement, I mentioned my interest in trying to get away from the Washington-centric prescriptions to various transportation challenges. In your testimony, you compared design-based standards with performance-based standards for safety. Could you share a little bit about that view?
Thank you. I'd love to.
Yeah.
I'd also like to start by saying, out of this conversation, it's such a pleasure to tell the committee that your freight rail network is the envy of the world, and we are part of the solution. We're self-funding. You don't have to raise a tax in order to have us invest in our railroads, and the railroads are in the best condition they've ever been in. So from a standpoint of safety regulation, when we see a cookie-cutter approach applied to us, a prescriptive mandate, we tend to experience significant dislocation that creates service problems and sometimes even increases safety issues for our customers and for our employees and the communities we serve. If you think about a current mandate, PTC, PTC has a very specific definition and a very specific targeted benefit. The PTC mandate is costing the industry $10 billion plus. We are unsure as to whether or not it's going to be effective. We will miss the mandated date, and we're doing everything in our power to get it installed and working and tested, and that's probably going to take us till 2020. As an industry, we're dedicated to safety. It is in our DNA. If instead Congress had said, industry, we want you to figure out how you're going to reduce the incidents and severity of incidents that are targeted by PTC, I guarantee we would come up with a solution that would be less costly and would be implemented in a more timely fashion. We're doing that across the board in how we run our railroads today. So that's just a small example, Chairman, about how prescriptive safety can be very costly and disruptive.
Thank you. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you for your testimony. Let me begin, Mr. Fritz, by pursuing the line of inquiry that Senator Fisher initiated on safety. You've mentioned technology as a critical element of safety, and in fact, your railroad has been one of the leaders in using some of that technology, cameras, for example. How important are additional measures such as, and I've advocated them, methods like redundant signal protection, alerters, close call reporting? Are these measures that you've adopted, and would you recommend them for railroads in general?
Senator, I'm so thankful for you asking that question. We are very aggressive, both as an industry, but specifically Union Pacific, at using technology investment and process improvement to improve safety, both of the communities that we serve and our employees. So you mentioned inward-facing cameras. Without any mandate, we've been working for about 2 years now, about a year and a half, on developing a technology, a use, and an understanding with our labor force, our craft professionals, on how to implement inward-facing cameras. The whole intent is so that we can understand behaviors in the cab of a locomotive and address whatever those behaviors are. We've invited our labor leadership to work with us to try to understand what those issues are and address them. I view that as a cultural issue that needs to be addressed. That strikes me as a much better way of getting at the issue than some prescriptive target that really doesn't have the reality of the working situation in mind. You had asked about close call reporting. In conjunction with our federal regulator, the Federal Railroad Administration, and our labor, again, our craft professionals, we entered into an agreement 6 or 7 years ago at our largest terminal to get into a close call reporting system called C3RS, which allows employees to report into an anonymous database staffed by both craft professionals and management that they either did get into an issue or almost got into an issue, and they're protected from both discipline ramifications and FRA ramifications for that reporting. In turn, that team is expected to debrief completely, to investigate the issue and find safety improvements through process, investment, training, et cetera. It's been a home run. It's been praised by the FRA. We love it as a management team, and we're taking it across our system. So we're committed. When we advocate everything you just said.
I would invite you, since our time is limited here, to come and meet with us and share, perhaps in greater depth, that experience, which I think would be enormously valuable in helping to shape this committee's perspective on the safety issue, because a lot of the pushback that we've received is it isn't practical, it isn't affordable, but I think you can really bring a story that will help us move the ball forward on safety. I want to shift to Governor Rendell. I detected, I think, a modicum of support for the gas tax increase on your part. But I would like to raise some alternatives because I agree with you absolutely, completely on the urgency and immediacy of these investment needs. And so there have been discussions and proposals. Senator Blunt and I have talked about a proposal for a public financing authority, also known by some as an infrastructure bank. I've supported this idea. I'm hoping that I can be part of its reintroduction in this session of Congress. Senator Bennett has been a leader, Senator Warner. Really, both sides of the aisle have backed this idea, at least in concept, and I think there is a growing consensus and a coalition behind it. So let me invite your views on that idea.
Well, we strongly support an infrastructure bank. It is the best vehicle, we think, for getting capital, private capital, into play for projects of regional and national significance. Interestingly, Tiger, as part of the stimulus, did just that. Tiger allowed states to combine and make requests for money for regional projects. I don't mean to quarrel with Mr. Fritz, but two of the nation's biggest eastern freight railways, CSX and Norfolk Southern, both came to me when I was governor, and they had projects called National Gateway and Crescent Corridor, went through 6 states. They asked me to get all 6 states' governors to agree to put money in, and we all did, all the states did. We went before for Tiger grants, and we got Tiger grants from the federal government. Those projects radically improved freight in the eastern half of the country, but there was private capital, state capital, and federal capital. And an infrastructure bank can be the best vehicle for private capital.
Thank you very much. This panel is really enormously valuable, and my time is over, unfortunately, and we will have votes coming up. I don't know whether we'll be able to return for another round of questioning, but I want to extend the same invitation to other members of the panel that I did to Mr. Fritz, that, speaking only for myself, I would really value an opportunity to pursue some of these issues, and Governor Rendell, particularly the infrastructure bank idea. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel, and thank you especially Governor Rendell for coming back and not giving up on this cause. I think it's a cause that time has come when you look at what's been going on around the states and the fact that there have been changes made to state laws that have allowed for more investment. And I hope that we'll start to see some changes here, because this is one of the top areas that Democrats and Republicans have agreed is an area where we can make some bipartisan progress. Senator Boxer, in her last 2 years here, I don't think she's going to exactly back down. I think she's ready to work again on a transportation bill, and as we all know, that money is running out. That needs to get done by, I think it is May, and we have a shortfall in that even going forward beyond what I think we'd like to see up here and on your panel, which is more investment. Our story from Minnesota, Governor, is interesting. It is true that Governor Dayton has now proposed a gas tax increase and some major changes. The state did increase the gas tax after the 35W bridge fell down in the middle of that Mississippi River on a summer day. It's 8 blocks from my house, an 8-lane highway. 13 people died, 17 cars submerged in the water, 111 people injured. It was a tragedy, and it was because of decaying infrastructure, and we all know that. The interesting political side of that was that the legislature then went in and passed a gas tax increase. Governor Pawlenty vetoed it. Then the votes got there to override his veto, and there were 5 or 6 Republicans that joined the Democrats in that effort. They were pretty much, there was actually a wanted sign put out against them in their own party. One of them changed parties and is now a Democrat. One remained a Republican and got elected, but the rest were not reelected or either kicked out of their party. That is a true story of what happened in Minnesota. What do I see now? I see a change. I think you see more Republicans like Senator Corker being able to talk about this issue, and I just think we're going to need support from the chamber and other organizations that are willing to have people's back and are willing to stand up for them and not run, fight off negative ads when people are willing to talk about investment. And I think that's a real problem here. It's not really a policy problem in that we all know we have to make this investment. It is really a political problem, and having the political will to get this done. My question is just on some of these solutions, and I guess I'd start with you, Governor Rendell, and anyone can chime in. We've obviously talked about the gas tax idea. As you know, Senator Murphy and Senator Corker's proposal, while it's not written, does take the money, I think, out of other parts of the budget. And so the second proposal that we have out there is the infrastructure bank, the financing authority, as we call it, which Senator Warner and others have put together. I'm on that bill, and the issue still is financing it. One of the ideas out there is repatriation. There's some bipartisan support for that. We're doing some kind of international tax reform, and then requiring that a certain amount of that money go into infrastructure financing to supplement the Highway Trust Fund. And I just wonder what people think of that idea. I guess I'd start with you, Governor.
First of all, one of the points I want to make is to finance the infrastructure bank. You have to put money in. It's more of a scoring problem for Washington than anything, because if that money gets loaned out, you're going to make money on it. You're not going to lose the $5 billion. It shouldn't be scored as money taken and increasing the federal deficit, because it's essentially like a loan guarantee program. You only lose the money if you have to pay off the guarantee. You only lose the money if the loans aren't repaid. If you look at the European Infrastructure Bank's history, they make money on the loans that they loan out. And it's a hugely important vehicle for improving the EU infrastructure. So that's number one. The repatriation bill for initial funding for the infrastructure bank, good idea. As a permanent solution,
yeah, it's
you
just
can't use repatriation.
Right. No,
it's a one shot, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it could be a big shot.
America's freight railroads support the kind of the user pay systems that are in place right now. So gas tax, an infrastructure fund, so long as it's funded by user of the infrastructure, we would support that for sure. And to the governor's point, the freight railroads support public-private partnership projects where there's benefit across a spectrum of constituents, and the project otherwise would not be done by any one constituent.
Have you looked at what they've done in Canada? Senator Blunt and Senator Stabenow and I and others went there, and they're doing a huge amount of work there. And that's kind of a public-private partnership.
Yeah, Union Pacific has enjoyed a public-private partnership project recently in Fort Worth, Texas, and it made sense. We paid about 1/3 of the project. Our counterpart, BNSF, paid about 1/3, and public monies paid about a third. And the division was predicated on who gets what benefit. That was negotiated up front, and then money's funding was divvied out based on who got what benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Senator, from the trucking industry, we agree that the user fee is the right way to go, and we think the cleanest and the most efficient way is to increase the gas tax, and we've been an advocate for that for some time. As far as other proposals that we've heard at Werner, you know, changing the structure and taxing at the barrel, and then you would refund the diesel tax, you would eliminate the gas tax, gasoline tax, and then tax at the barrel. And then on the diesel, you would still pay it at the barrel, but then we get a refund for that. So the stats that I saw, it made some sense. It had some tail to it that could withstand things other than the repatriation issue. Mm-hmm. So something does have to be done. The governor is absolutely correct that these numbers are staggering as to what it's costing the industry and the economy and safety. And the gas tax increase, although not all that attractive, is the best solution as far as we're concerned.
Now, the happy ending to my story, and then I'll let someone else go, was that basically then the Democrats who voted for that, you know, did fine in the election, and we, I think, turned around in the next election even stronger, so, which I've heard happen in other states. But I do think the reality of it is that it's a difficult thing, and the only way to do it is bipartisan, and so people agree, something Senator Fisher is pretty good at doing. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. Real quick, Senator Rendell, and I want to just say for the record, you are a phenomenal leader. When I was a young mayor coming up, you were one of my mentor mayors and shaped my early career, and I'm really grateful for that, and I just want to be able to say that now.
Thank you.
I just really quickly, because you've already made your point, but I just want to just highlight something. There is about over $3 trillion deficit, infrastructure deficit in America. Is that true? Yes?
It's anywhere between 2 and 3 trillion. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimated it at about 2 trillion.
Okay, so let's call it 2 trillion. Let's be conservative with our numbers. The president's proposal, President Obama's proposal, which is just about $300 billion over, I think, 4 years, if I'm correct.
Right.
That seems to be an anemic, paltry, inadequate sum to meet the needs. Would you agree with that characterization?
Well, remember, when we talk about infrastructure deficits, we're talking about more than just transportation. We're talking about water and sewer. We're talking about broadband. We're talking. The president's investment is not sufficient, but I wouldn't call it anemic. I would call it, in light of what the past congressional history has been, it's significant. Should it be more? Building America's Future, a bipartisan organization.
Sir, forgive me to interrupt one of my mentors. I just want to get to the point because I have very little time. If the history conspired to make you president of the United States right now, you would be having a much bolder proposal with a lot more investment in infrastructure, correct?
Sure. I would spend about $100 billion a year additional. The CBO in 2008 said we could sustain spending as a country $180 billion a year more than we're doing now.
So in other words, the number is probably closer to what Bernie Sanders is putting forth when he called for $1 trillion over 5 years. Would that be correct?
No question.
No question that he is more in the right as far as meeting our needs, fueling our economy, improving our job creation, and frankly, getting a return for taxpayers that more than meets that investment.
Right. We all talk about creating middle-class jobs, both parties. Well, DOT says 25,000 jobs created for $1 billion of infrastructure investment, and that's pretty close to correct. We tracked it in Pennsylvania. Think about what that would mean in jobs, that type of investment. It would mean about 4 million additional jobs that pay 50, 60, 70, 80,000.
I'm happy to hear Ed Rendell and Bernie Sanders in agreement. That's a wonderful day. Real quick, I just to Mr. Means and Mr. Mullen, I just want you all to know I respect what you all do. You are phenomenal business leaders, producing incredible jobs. I read a little bit about both of your companies and just have a lot of respect. So please understand that I'm not quibbling with the kind of Americans you are and what you're doing for our country. I have a lot of concerns. My highways are a lot more congested than the highways of your home state, and I have a lot of concerns about truck safety. And you taught me something today, because I didn't know, and I agree with you. I've seen cars do very dumb, I should say, unfortunate things around trucks, causing truck driver accidents. And I think you're right, they shouldn't be scored the same way, and that's something that I agree with you on. But I have a lot of problems with and I do disagree with you, sir, the evidence from the U.S. Department of Transportation Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is that truck accidents are going up in a startling and unfortunate way between 2009 and 2012. And I'd like to put in for the record analysis of truck size and weight safety summary findings, a report that was done about the when these trucks are involved in accidents, the severe consequences it have. And so I guess the two questions
objection.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman and friend. So just 2 points I want to make in the remaining seconds that I have. That if trucks are increasing, why is there an attempt to roll back sleep regulations and increase the size of trucks? It seems to me counterintuitive that if the problem is getting worse, why would we let them push further into the endurance levels of human beings when we know there's a strong correlation, as you admitted in your testimony, that these are truck driver mistakes? And then the second point I'd love for you to comment on, and then I'm done, is that the cost of these accidents is being borne by my state. Because the annual cost to society from crashes involving commercial motor vehicles is estimated at $99 billion. Minimum insurance levels for trucks are just set at $750,000. And so a fatal multi-vehicle truck accident, for example, can cost over $20 million to compensate for injured, care for families, and more importantly to our infrastructure, or not more importantly, excuse me, also with our infrastructure, to pay for the destruction of the highways that incur. So those are the 2 points that I just have, that it seems like the truck industry is pushing for a rollback of common sense sleep regulations, and they have an inadequate investment because the cost right now of those accidents is being borne, it's an externality that's being borne by taxpayers.
Senator, we absolutely agree that driver error is the top cause of accidents. What I don't think is true is to contribute a percentage of that to fatigue, a large percentage of that to fatigue. So I would disagree that the industry is trying to roll back the sleep requirements, the restart provisions. You know, we had the restart pre-July of 13 for a long period of time, and that's when you saw an improvement in accident frequency. And you've seen that improvement over the last decade. So, and you hear discussion about the 80-hour work week. That only happens in a perfect freight world where the freight is the right freight, and the driver has the timing, just the right timing to pick up and deliver and to take the 34-hour restart. So in the real world, that 80-hour week just doesn't really occur. And so it's not so much the hours of service and the regulations that's causing the accident that we should be focused on. It's other things like speed that we talked about. So for instance, the industry has been asking to have speed limiters. I mean, how often do you ask for regulations? We've been asking for speed limiters, and most of the industry govern their trucks at 68 or below. Werner governs their trucks at 63 miles an hour because it's the right thing to do. So we just have a difference of opinion on how to go about attacking the safety problem and even the fatigue issue. We just don't believe changing the hours of service restart was the answer. We believe that took away from flexibility of the driver. It put more traffic in congestion times, such as 5 in the morning after the restart, 1 to 5, 1 to 5. So we have the same goal, which is to have a less fatigued, safer driver, but you have a difference of opinion on how to get there. Our opinion is that the science that the FMCSA relied upon to change the rules back in July of 13 was flawed. We think that it contradicted, in fact, the science that FMCSA relied on when they had the previous restart rule. So just a difference of opinion on that sort of thing. As far as the insurance minimums, I understand where you're coming from, 750 being the minimum has been for some time. It's being looked at. The FMCSA has asked for opinions. We'll weigh in on it. And it's something that ought to be looked at as an industry, and hopefully the FMCSA will have enough data to make a meaningful decision.
All right. My time has expired because Governor Rendell took such long answers.
Senator Booker, he's your mentor.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this panel is very good. I mean, it's an A-list panel. They did a fantastic job here today. Governor, you said that passenger trains today are slower than they were 50 years ago. Yes. Which is just a stunning statement. What is slower today than it was 50 years ago, except for passenger trains? Huh? Everything else is faster.
Nothing I can think of.
Just amazing. And even in Massachusetts, in Boston, the trains can average 150 miles per hour going into the Boston terminal, but they average only half of that.
Right.
Okay, so that's just a statement of how much we've gone backwards over the last 50 years.
No question.
Can you talk a little bit about that and what you believe to be kind of the two-point program to get us out of that rut and move
Myself,
faster?
Governor Pataki, former Secretary of Transportation Mary Peters, we rode a train in Japan, a maglev train, 47 miles. It went 314 miles an hour. It levitated 6 inches above the ground. Governor Pataki, who was a very tall man, stood up, took a pad and a pen, and wrote, and his hand didn't move. You ride the Acela when it goes 150 miles an hour, you take your life into your own hands if you stand up. We need, our rail system, passenger rail system in the United States is a joke. It's a joke compared to European and Asian rail systems. We can build in California in the Northeast Corridor, where I think there's enough quantity of potential riders to make it feasible. We can build high-speed rail. We should build it with a combination of private and public funding. The Japanese government is so interested in introducing maglev technology, they're willing to put up $5 billion to build the first leg between Washington and Baltimore. And by the way, if they build it, you'll get to BWI from Washington, D.C. in 6 minutes.
And that's not a fantasy, it's possible.
It exists
for
in
anyone
Japan.
that's rode a train in Japan or China or France, it's possible. But you have to basically get out of this old mentality that we have in the United States and realize that in a lot of ways there was greater dedication to rail back 50 years ago and 100 years ago than there has been today. But if we upgraded it at the same rate that we have other technologies, for example, when the President says that fuel economy standards can go to 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025, make that the law, which it is now, all of a sudden we're not averaging 25 miles per gallon anymore. Now we have hybrids and all-electric cars, and we're about a third of the way through the whole process, but America is ready to go. They love this new technology that's available to them in the showrooms, and we have to have the same attitude about rail. So let me turn to you, Mr. Fritz, and ask you about the Federal Communications Commission and the 20,000 towers that they have to work through in order to put them along the tracks of the rail system in America in order to make sure that this new safety system can be implemented in a timely telescope time frame process. Can you talk a little bit about that and what your commentary is on the FCC process?
Sure. About a year and a half ago, we ran, as part of implementing PTC, we have to install radio towers on our right-of-way. We ran into a problem where one set of federal regulations administered through the FCC created a bottleneck for us being able to actually install those towers, to the extent that towers were not installed for about a year until that bottleneck could be resolved. The FCC worked diligently on trying to find a solution. They have found a solution, and we are back installing towers. But that's just a great example of how disjointed regulation can take a project that has been mandated to us through Congress, PTC, and make it an impossibility to actually fulfill that mandate. So a little bit more diligent coordination and thoughtfulness would be value.
So back when we passed the 1996 Telecommunications Act, for example, we had to put together a whole system of towers across the country so that people could talk to each other. And it was interesting because the people in wealthier communities did not want cell phone towers in their communities, although when they went to work in the blue-collar parts of town, the downtown areas, they wanted their cell phones to work. But we needed a law, we needed a way of getting that done, and all of a sudden, everyone could talk on their cell phones no matter where they were. There are some exceptions, but it's pretty good. So what would you say today has to happen in order to move at the same pace here along an already established route in order to accomplish that goal?
In terms of
Yeah,
cell or
getting
radio
the cell
towers?
up, making it
Yeah.
possible to make rail more safe. What do we have to do? I mean, we did it before, 20 years ago. Why can't we do it right now?
So I think there's a solution in place now, and we are back up to speed in terms of installing radio towers. Right now, the heavy lift on PTC is the fact that it's unproven technology. We're installing it as we invent it. Union Pacific's going to be largely installed and starting to test, let's say, sometime in 2017. The industry, to varying degrees because of the availability of product and expertise. What needs to be appreciated from a PTC perspective is it is not an off-the-shelf technology. We've invented a radio. We've built a radio company. We've built a spectrum company. This is as an industry. And we've invented this back office system that'll be able to, on anyone's railroad, anyone's equipment, stop any train prior to one of 4 different catalysts. That's a hell of a lift, and I'm very proud of our industry for having done as good as it has. It's still unknown as to whether or not it's going to work and what kind of impact it'll have on service for our customers, on safety for our communities.
Mr. Fritz, my time has expired. Can you tell the committee, maybe in writing, what you need in order to telescope the time frame to determine whether or not it's going to work? I think we have to put this under a microscope because it just can't go on and on and on and on. We need a system in place that has all parties accountable to bring everyone to the table to say, what's the problem? Why can't we invent this? Or can we bring in new people? You know, maybe we have to bring in Silicon Valley just to say, let's just get this done fast.
Senator,
the smartest people in order to get it done and save money. The longer it goes, is the more it's going to cost us.
Senator, I think at this point the freight rail industry is implementing PTC as quickly as it can possibly be implemented. We support Thune's bill and the concept of giving us an extension to recognize both our effort and the fact that it's an extremely heavy lift. And I think that's enough said on that.
Okay, good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Markey. The record will be open for 2 weeks, Senator, if you want to submit questions, and then the witnesses can respond. Thank you. Senator Moran.
Madam Chairman, thank you, and congratulations on chairing a subcommittee, and I look forward to working with you. Perhaps once in a while we'll have some Kansas witnesses as well as Nebraska. Mr. Mullen, let me start with you, and thank you all for being here. On trucking, I was interested in your conversation, your testimony in regard to Senator Booker's questions, and you, what I take from that is that it may be that the regulators are focused on perhaps the things that are slightly less important than things that are more important, that they're not finding necessarily the solutions to the problems that are out there. And so my question is, what is it that this committee, this subcommittee, can do to make certain that FMCSA is focused on the things that would have the most consequence for improving safety, better protecting the public, better protecting your drivers and your trucks, and still being able to operate an efficient trucking system that allows us to be competitive in a global economy? Well, what's missing? Why do we not have the things focused the way they should be?
Well, I think first they need to prioritize what it is has the greatest impact on safety. And our position is the hours of service restart was not the way to go about doing it. It spent a lot of time and money and resources in the industry quarreling over whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do.
So how does the agency get headed down the path of that issue as compared to, is there just disagreement as to what's the most important?
So they haven't told me why they went down that path. My suspicion is that perhaps it was more politically motivated than it was otherwise. So I think it was just misguided to spend that much time on that thing versus, for instance, mandating compliance with the existing rules by the electronic logging devices, right? So again, Werner's been on ELDs for over a decade. You have absolute 24/7 view into what your driver's doing. You know when he's compliant with the law, and in the event he tries not to, you can prevent that from happening. So it just doesn't seem to be a good use of time to quarrel on the fringe of the restart. And by the way, for instance, on the restart, since July of 13, the 12 months rolling preceding July 13, or July 1 of 2013, versus the next 12 months, there has been no improvement in accident frequency. So the data would suggest that that was a misguided effort again. Put the science aside, just the data after the fact would suggest that it was misguided. Things you could perhaps do is incentives. Perhaps have FMC have incentives for folks that will do non-regulated measures such as onboard recorders, a little too late for the LDs, things of that nature, to have incentives for trucking companies to go above beyond the regulations to make sure that the roads are safer. That's where we like to see them go. And to some extent, level that playing field. You know, CSA has been, it's done some good things for the industry, and certainly anytime you talk about the issue of safety more than you did before, that in itself has some benefit. But let's make it fair. The stated purpose was to have focused audits. Well, it's gone well beyond that. They're now trying to regulate things that have nothing to do with accident frequency. In fact, some has nothing to do with accident severity. The hazmat basic is a perfect example. You can get a violation because your placard is off kilter on your truck. Let's not spend time on things like that. Let's spend time on things like traffic enforcement versus inspections. The data suggests that money spent on traffic enforcement versus roadside inspections has a 4-to-1 rate of return better than on roadside. So again, just focusing on those types of things, enforcement versus inspection, root cause like speed versus peripheral things like the restart. And I think you're going to have time that's better spent and your results are going to be better.
Again, Mr. Mullen, tell me about, in a time in our country in which employment is such an important issue and jobs matter, there's a tremendous need for drivers. What's the industry able to accomplish? What are the impediments that we might look at that prevent those who need a job, who have the capabilities of driving a truck, from finding a job?
Yeah, so it's a tremendous need. That's probably the strongest headwind for trucking right now is the driver shortage, and there doesn't seem to be any relief in the near future. And so folks in our industry are doing what they can to make it a more attractive job, whether it's a better way of life, you're getting home more frequently, better amenities and technology in the truck. You know, we work all the time with truck stops to make sure they're adding amenities at a good clip, and of course compensation. Compensation has been going up in the industry lately. At Werner alone, in the last 12 months, we've had over a 10% pay raise across our fleet. So those are the type of things we need to do to make it attractive. We need to stop calling them bad people. We need to stop picking on them as if they are the root cause of everything that happens bad on the roadway, and just need to have a more positive image of a truck driver. You know, folks that used to want to get into the industry and be a truck driver, they're not interested anymore because it has that black eye, and a lot of it is our own doing. So it's going to be a problem for some time, and we do all that we can. We're hiring more veterans. We hire about 168 veterans on a weekly basis to drive.
Is there a program by which somebody who is licensed within the military has the capability of easily transitioning to the private sector?
There is some states who allow the transition. If you operated a heavy vehicle in the military, you can get a CDL virtually automatically. Candidly, we're a little skeptic of that, and so that's why we put those types of folks in our finishing school the minute they get to our company. So yeah, there are programs out there to alleviate the transition from military life into the private sector and to trucking specifically.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you very much. Incidentally, we do see the Werner trucks in Kansas, and certainly Union Pacific is prevalent in our state as well. So there's a sense of Kansas to those couple of Nebraskans here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Moran. There's just a few of us here yet, and the votes have not been called, so I would suggest we can each ask one question. Senator Moran won't be able to do that. Senator Booker, would you be interested in doing that?
Yes, since Senator Moran's leaving, can we ask 1.5 questions?
You may. You may. Thank you. Governor, you had talked about the harbor and ports and the fund there and money being stolen from that in the past.
I don't think I said stolen.
Well, that's why you're a governor. But the diversion of funding at the federal level, I think, has been a great cause of concern.
Huge problem.
I personally would like to see the Highway Trust Fund used for roads and bridges. There's much in there that is taken out for other areas that I think needs to be put back in to meet our responsibilities. It's a priority. I would just be interested in your thoughts on that, and if you think that's an area that we can look at to see if we would be able to, I guess, recoup some of that funding so we can meet our obligations.
Well, I think in theory, I would support the idea of making the Highway Trust Fund just limited to roads and bridges. But I think the effort to expand other modes of transportation are very, very important because they take cars off the road. One of the questions, I'm sorry Senator Markey isn't here, the Northeast Corridor will increase by 2030, will increase our population by 40%. And there's not enough I-95 to support that. We've got to get people riding trains. So we've got to find alternate modes. In urban centers, bike paths, green paths, walking trails, those things are valuable in getting people out of their cars and off the roads and helping with congestion. So maybe...
Is it fair to be able to increase the gas tax that you promote, a user fee of people who are on highways, and divert that money for mass transit, beautification, trails? Should we be looking at another funding source for those?
First of all, for transit itself, we need to continue to support that out of the gas tax, because transit is crucial to keeping our highways in some non-congested condition, and non-congested is probably an oxymoron these days. But so we ought to be doing more for transit. For other forms, these alternative forms that have cropped up, I would agree with you, but I would urge Congress to find an alternative source of money, because they are valuable. They are valuable. One of the things we've seen in American cities, and now I'm putting my mayor hat on, is young people coming back to live in cities. And one of the reasons they come back to live in the cities, because they're bicycle friendly, because they're trail paths, because you can ride along the river. Senator Booker knows what I'm talking about, because Newark's experiencing that to some degree. And it's a great thing for cities to have young people there. They add vitality. So yeah, if you want to make the Highway Trust Fund for transit, roads, and bridges exclusively, that's okay and it makes sense. But we should find an alternate vehicle for other modes of transportation, because they all help us do it. And urban needs are different than rural needs, and I think we have to consider that.
Thank you very much. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much. I will not be asking any questions to Governor Rendell. But when I was mayor, I had, and this is why I love talking to business people, when I was mayor, I had a saying that, in God we trust, but everybody else bring me data. And if you get away from the politics, as you were saying, and just focus on the data, they should educate your decisions. And so I just want to go back, because I think you're giving me some insights that have been valuable about where to focus regulation to get the best in highway safety. But I just want to stick for a second with the fatigued driver issues. And let's put aside the restart rule, which you said might be forcing, that was the argument that was made, that might be forcing more traffic on the road at 5 a.m. or other odd hours. And just stick to the idea that should truckers be driving 82-hour weeks versus driving what the rollback was until this temporary halt, just 70 hours a week. Now, I don't have the exact data that I quoted in a floor speech that I gave about the large percentage of our accidents that are specifically linked to fatigued drivers. It is a significant percentage, and I can get that for you from the research. And the data, this wasn't just something thrown together. The research was, and I'm not exaggerating the number, hundreds and hundreds of independent studies that showed about what the human limits are before you start going into a very dangerous fatigue in which you are more susceptible to your reaction time being slowed down, towards your focus and concentration being slowed on the roads. And so when we see consistently in New Jersey a raising of truck driver accidents, some very high-profile accidents in which people have pushed past that 70 hours a week and we're now upwards of the 80 and more, whether this is the most bang for your buck on the regulations you need, don't you think it's just common sense that we study and know that there are limits indeed for any of us towards human endurance? And why should we allow people on the roads driving these large vehicles to become like guided missiles should a person lose control? Shouldn't we limit those in a common sense way so that human beings don't push into that danger zone in which their reaction time and their focus makes them more prone to accidents?
Yeah, so there's a lot to cover there. On the rollback, that, as you described, so what happened in 2013 was we changed the restart, which the 34-hour restart, you could take it whenever you wanted, as long as you took the 34-hour restart, you reset your clock. In 2013, we changed that you had to have 1 to 5, 1 to 5. We didn't change the 11-hour driving, 14-hour on-duty driving a day, 70-hour in 8 days. None of that was changed. So all we really changed was the restart. And it's our position, and we believe the data supports that that change wasn't warranted as it relates to safety. In fact, we believe it's not possible that there be more traffic on in that 5 to 7 a.m. time period. That's a fact. As an industry member, we've seen that. We had to accommodate, and so more of our trucks were coming out 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. on a Monday morning than they were before. That's a fact. And we believe that had actually a detrimental impact on safety versus a beneficial impact from safety from the other aspects of the change. So again, we're talking about the same thing, Senator. We absolutely want a less fatigued driver, just a different way of going about it.
And so let's put again the restart rule aside for a second. You and I then both agree that a driver who's driving 80+ hours a week, I'm sure all of us are working 80-hour work weeks, but that amount of time behind a wheel, you would agree then that the reams of studies, and I can present them to you if you want, that show that at that point a driver has lower focus, a slower reaction time, and is more prone to accidents.
So my suspicion is the data would support that 80 hours a week on a regular basis does have a detrimental impact on fatigue and your ability to keep watch. But in practice, Senator, that just doesn't happen with any regularity. Talking about just getting better.
So why would the trucking industry, because it doesn't happen with regularity, why doesn't the trucking industry just concede to that 70 hours a week then, 72 hours a week?
Because we're talking about different things. The 70-hour was never changed. What changed was the restart. So under the old restart, if again in that perfect freight atmosphere that I tried to describe to you earlier, where you have the right loads at the right time, the traffic doesn't impede you, and you get the restart at the exact same time, right time, you can get over that 70 hours, but it's in a perfect world. And so when the whole idea of changing the restart came about, we did our own study internally. We did not have drivers getting past 70 hours. It just doesn't happen. It might happen in some small areas, but it just doesn't happen as a routine matter or even a prevalent matter. So that 80 hours that you keep referring to, that is that perfect world. The rules don't say you can drive 80 hours in 8 days. The rules say 70 hours in 8 days, but the restart can allow you to get over that 70. So I hear you, and the 80 sounds very compelling when you talk about it, but it just doesn't happen. And what we would prefer is you talk about circumstances that actually are more common, and you can actually drive down the frequency at a greater rate than quarreling about all these other issues.
Right, and I'll conclude just by saying that it does happen where drivers, we had a very, you know, the accident in New Jersey that got a lot of national headlines. That was somebody that was past 80 hours. So it factually does happen that somebody drives more than 80 hours a week. That is an incontrovertible fact. You and I can argue about different ways of getting there, but if you and I are in agreement with the fact that in one work week to get 80 hours endangers people on highways, we should find a way to prevent that. Both industry should want that, as well as those who are in charge of trying to keep our highways safe.
Senator, if we could talk later, that'd be fantastic, because I think we have the same passion, just in going about different ways, and that the tragedy you referred to, again, tragedy. He was within his hours of service. Bad decisions, you can't regulate bad decisions out of the marketplace. He was within his hours of service, but he made personal decisions on his personal time that contributed to the fatigue, unfortunately, which led to that accident. Thank you for your question.
No, sir, thank you. And again, I appreciate the business you do for our country.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks, and during this time, senators may submit any questions for the record. Upon receipt, the witnesses are requested to submit their written answers to the committee as soon as possible. With that, I will conclude the hearing. I thank the witnesses for being here. I think we had a great panel today. Thank you so much. We are adjourned.